The future has a rude habit of not reading the forecast. That is the mood of the next section of the psychology of money. Housel is not anti-planning. He is anti-pretending. Plans are useful, but only when they admit that the world is messy. People change, markets surprise, and every worthwhile strategy charges some kind of price. Welcome back. In this fourth part, we cover surprise, room for error, you'll change, and nothing's free. These chapters are about uncertainty, humility, flexibility, and the emotional cost of investing. Chapter 12, Surprise, begins with a warning about history. Investors love history because it is the closest thing we have to a laboratory. We study crashes, booms, inflation, interest rates, wars, recessions, recoveries, bubbles, and policy mistakes. That is useful, but history can also mislead when we treat it as a complete guide to what must happen next. Housel argues that the most important events are often the ones that were hardest to predict. The world changes because of surprises, wars, inventions, political shifts, pandemics, financial crises, technological breakthroughs, and social changes that did not fit neatly into previous data. If the biggest drivers of outcomes are surprises, then a plan built on exact prediction is fragile. This does not mean history is useless. It means history should teach humility more than precision. The lesson of financial history is not, here is exactly what will happen next. The lesson is surprising things happen, people overreact, incentives matter, risk hides during good times, and recovery is possible even after terrible periods. The danger is overfitting the past. If you study one era too closely, you may prepare perfectly for a world that no longer exists. An investor who fights the last war may miss the next one. A saver who assumes future inflation will match a personal memory may be right or wrong. A forecaster who builds confidence from old patterns may forget that the next shock does not owe the old pattern loyalty. Chapter 13, Room for Error, is Housel's answer to surprise. Room for error means designing your financial life so you can be wrong and still survive. It is margin of safety. It is humility translated into structure. This idea sounds conservative, but it is what allows endurance. If your plan only works under ideal conditions, it is not a plan. It is a wish with formatting. A real plan leaves space for bad timing, lower returns, higher expenses, lost income, illness, market crashes, family needs, and your own mistakes. Room for error can look like an emergency fund, a lower debt load, a diversified portfolio, conservative return assumptions, insurance, flexible spending, or simply not living at the edge of every paycheck. It can also look like emotional margin, not taking so much risk that you panic and destroy the plan during a downturn. Housel emphasizes that risk is what is left over after you think you have thought of everything. That is why margin matters. You cannot list every possible problem. You can only admit that the list is incomplete and build enough cushion to absorb what you did not imagine. This is especially important because leverage, debt, and overconfidence can remove room for error. When everything must go right, one wrong event can force a bad decision. The investor who needs to sell during a crash loses the ability to wait. The household with no cushion loses the ability to choose. The business with no margin becomes hostage to small shocks. Room for error is not pessimism. It is the condition that lets optimism survive. If you believe the long run is promising, you need a way to get there. Margin is the bridge between current uncertainty and future opportunity. Chapter 14, You'll Change, turns the uncertainty inward. The future is not only unknown because markets change. It is unknown because you change. Your goals, values, family situation, career, health, interests, and tolerance for risk may look different in 10 or 20 years. This is a difficult problem because long-term planning requires imagining a future self. But we often underestimate how much that future self will differ from the person making the plan today. A young person may plan for maximum career ambition and later value time. Someone may choose a lifestyle, job, or financial strategy that fits one phase of life and becomes a cage in another. Housel's advice is to avoid extreme ends of planning. Extreme commitment can leave no room for change. If you design a life that only works if you never change your mind, you may trap yourself. Flexibility has value because it gives your future self options. This does not mean never commit. Marriage, family, career, investing, and saving all require commitment. But wise commitment leaves some room for adaptation. Avoiding irreversible decisions when possible, saving more than the minimum, keeping lifestyle manageable, and not tying identity too tightly to one plan can all help. The chapter also explains why regret can be so painful. You make decisions with one version of yourself, then another version has to live with them. The earlier self may have wanted status, excitement, or intensity. The later self may want peace, health, or time. A good financial life respects the fact that the self is not fixed. Chapter 15, Nothing's Free, gives investing one of its best metaphors. Every investment return has a price. Sometimes the price is obvious, like a fee. Sometimes it is hidden, like volatility, uncertainty, regret, boredom, and fear. The mistake is treating market volatility as a fine or punishment rather than as the fee required for long-term returns. This idea is powerful because it changes the emotional meaning of downturns. If you see volatility as a fine, you feel wronged. You think something has gone badly that should not have happened. If you see volatility as a fee, you understand that it is part of the deal. You're paying for the possibility of higher long-term returns. The amusement park charges admission before the ride. Markets often charge during the ride, when your stomach is already reconsidering your life choices. The fee is uncertainty. The fee is watching prices fall. The fee is not knowing whether this decline is normal turbulence or something worse. The fee is staying patient when patience feels foolish. Many people try to avoid the fee by timing the market, jumping in and out, or seeking returns without discomfort. Housel's warning is that attempts to avoid the fee can create larger costs. If you want the reward, you must accept the price. Not every price is worth paying, but pretending there is no price is dangerous. Together, these chapters form a practical philosophy of uncertainty. Study history, but do not worship it. Make plans, but include margin. Commit, but leave flexibility. Seek returns, but understand the emotional fee. For viewers, this part asks several hard questions. Could your plan survive being wrong? Are your expectations flexible enough for a future you who may want different things? Do you have enough room for error, or are you relying on everything going right? When volatility arrives, will you treat it as proof of failure or as the fee you already agreed to pay? This is where personal finance becomes less about precision and more about resilience. Precision says, here is exactly what will happen. Resilience says, I do not know exactly what will happen, so I will build a life that can handle a range of outcomes. Housel's tone is realistic, not gloomy. The future can be wonderful. Compounding can work. Markets can reward patience. Careers can grow. Opportunities can appear. But optimism without margin is fragile. Optimism with room for error can endure long enough to benefit from the good surprises as well as survive the bad ones. Thank you for watching this fourth part. In the next episode, we look at why people play different money games, why pessimism sounds smarter than optimism, why stories can overpower evidence, and how Housel pulls the book's lessons together. Final close. The future will surprise you, and you will surprise yourself. A good money plan leaves enough room for both. The uncertainty chapters are also a critique of overconfidence. In finance, Confidence is often rewarded socially before it is rewarded by reality. The person with a precise forecast sounds useful. The person who says, "I do not know," sounds evasive. Yet humility may be the more accurate position. The future is not unknown because we have failed to find the perfect expert. It is unknown because the world is complex. History can help by revealing recurring human behaviors. People get greedy. People panic. Debt can amplify weakness. Innovation can create abundance. Incentives matter. Narratives can detach from reality. These are useful lessons. But history cannot provide a complete script because the characters, tools, policies, technologies, and shocks keep changing. That is why room for error is not optional. If you accept that surprise is normal, margin becomes a form of honesty. It says, "I have a plan and I know the plan is incomplete." It says, "I believe in the long run, and I refuse to make my survival depend on perfect short-term conditions." A lack of margin often hides during good times. When income is steady, markets are rising, and credit is available, fragility can look like confidence. The household with high debt looks successful. The investor with leverage looks brilliant. The business with no cushion looks efficient. Then conditions change, and what looked efficient is revealed as brittle. Margin can feel wasteful when nothing is going wrong. That is the whole point. Insurance feels wasteful until the event. Cash feels lazy until opportunity or crisis. Conservative assumptions feel gloomy until the optimistic forecast fails. Housel wants readers to understand that the value of safety is usually invisible until it is needed. The chapter about changing also asks for compassion toward your future self. People often make permanent decisions in temporary moods. They assume today's ambition, risk tolerance, career desire, or lifestyle preference will last forever. Sometimes it does. Often it does not. A wise financial life avoids locking every door before the future self arrives. This is one reason savings and low fixed costs are so valuable. They create the ability to change. A person with a high savings rate and manageable obligations can switch paths more easily than someone whose lifestyle requires uninterrupted maximum income. Flexibility is not indecision. It is respect for the fact that life has seasons. The fee metaphor in "Nothing's Free" may be one of the most useful emotional tools in the book. Volatility hurts less when it is understood as part of the bargain. It still hurts, of course. Watching money decline is not a spa treatment, but the meaning changes. Instead of thinking something is broken, you can think this is the cost of admission for an asset class that has historically rewarded patience. That does not mean every fee is worth paying. Some investments charge too much risk for too little expected reward. Some strategies are too complex, too leveraged, or too dependent on perfect behavior. Housel's point is not pay any price. It is know the price before you enter, and do not act shocked when the bill arrives. The practical result is a calmer plan. You can expect surprise without trying to predict its exact form. You can hold margin without apologizing for inefficiency. You can give your future self options. You can treat volatility as a known fee rather than an insult. This is not a plan for certainty. It is a plan for adulthood. The uncertainty section also connects to regret. People often imagine the pain of missing upside more vividly than the pain of being financially trapped. During rising markets, margin can feel like a drag. Cash feels foolish. Conservative assumptions feel like a failure of imagination. Then the cycle turns, and the same margin becomes dignity. That dignity matters. A person with room for error can make decisions slowly. A person without it may be forced to decide at the worst possible moment. Selling during a panic, borrowing under pressure, staying in a harmful job, or accepting a bad deal can all be consequences of having no margin. The cost of fragility is not only financial. It is emotional and practical. The chapter about changing future selves is equally important for career and lifestyle choices. It is easy to build a life around maximum income when you're young and energetic. But later, time, health, family, autonomy, or meaning may become more important. If every expense assumes the old priority will last forever, the future self has little room to breathe. Nothing's free brings the lesson back to investing discipline. The market's fee is not always charged when you feel prepared. It may arrive after a long day, during a family stress, or while the news is shouting. This is why the plan must be accepted in advance. If you only decide whether volatility is tolerable after it arrives, you may negotiate with fear when fear has all the leverage. The best preparation is to choose a level of risk whose fee you can actually pay, not the fee someone else can pay, not the fee that looks optimal in a model, the fee you can pay without abandoning the plan. That is the difference between knowing about volatility and being prepared for it. The practical discipline is to pre-commit to humility. Before the surprise arrives, decide that surprises are part of the system. Before the downturn arrives, decide what level of decline you can live with. Before your future self changes, avoid building a life that depends on one permanent identity. Before the fee arrives, decide whether the expected reward is worth paying for. This is also why Housel's advice can look conservative while still being optimistic. He is optimistic enough to believe in long-term progress, compounding, and human adaptability. He is conservative enough to know that none of those benefits help you if you are forced out too early. The margin is what lets the optimism breathe. So when a plan includes cash, diversification, modest assumptions, and flexibility, it is not necessarily timid. It may be ambitious in a more durable way. It says, I want the future's upside, and I am willing to build a structure strong enough to wait for it. That is a very different attitude from chasing upside, while secretly depending on perfect conditions.